The Data Engineering Show is brought to you by Firebolt, the cloud data warehouse for low latency analytics. Get $200 credits and start your free trial at firebolt.io.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Data Engineering Show. Today, we're super happy to have Wouter joining, who leads the data analytics consultancy called Xudo. Wouter, do you want to say a few intro words, introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, so my name is Wouter Trappers. I'm working from Ghent in Belgium, and I'm indeed the founder of Xudo. With Xudo, the intention is to guide people through their business intelligence journey. But myself, I'm a philosopher from background, so I really am an autodidact, and I rolled into this profession going from job to job and then learning every time a little bit more. So yeah, that's a bit my background.
Sure, that's already a lot to unpack. So from philosopher to basically BI and data analytics consultant, that's a super interesting journey. Maybe tell us a bit more about that in your background.
Yeah, so like you may expect, there's not really a job that really fits the philosophy backgrounds one-on-one. So after you study a broad study like philosophy, you still needs to orient yourself a bit in the job market. So first started working as a teacher, but then I already found out it was not really my thing. And I started working in the private sector with basic admin jobs. And then I discovered I had a knack for analysis and for Excel. And basically that started my data journey, as maybe a lot of other people as well.
Benjamin, once upon a time, Excel was that thing that ignited all the passion on data and crunching and analyzing data, and it still is. So thanks for the intro.
I think there are still a lot of people who start with Excel, mainly in other jobs than IT, people in marketing or in finance or supply chain, who discovered the power of data through Excel. So I still think it's still a gateway into data for a lot of people.
Definitely. So then after you got hooked on data analytics through Excel, basically, tell us a bit about your journey that ultimately got you to then start your own company now.
Yeah, started indeed in Excel. Then I started in a financial controlling department of a large retail store here in Belgium. In the European retail store is also active in the US now. It's Lidl. And there I used Excel and then also Access to automate all the processes for controlling and reporting, and also using VBA. And then when the data sets became too large for Excel, getting into Access and then learning what a database is, how you write SQL code, and then going from there. Once you know the front-end sub-functions of Excel and the back-end SQL that's behind it, you can basically learn any BI tool on the market. So after that, I switched to a company that builds software for medical professions like pharmacies, general practitioners, and so on, everything except for hospitals. It's called Corellus. And there I was introduced to ClickView, now ClickSense, a product of the Click company, where I started applying the principles that I learned during my time working with Excel and Access, but then in a more professional business intelligence environment. There I automated all the BI flows for the different departments, like after sales, customer care, sales, finance, and HR. And then the people finally knew what was going on in their company. Yeah.
MS Access, VBA.
Yes.
Those are terms people mostly don't remember anymore. But let me tell you this. This is how data engineering started. Before VBA, we had to get out of our environment to write code. And VBA was that first programming language that was embedded within our business apps. So Excel, MS Access, Microsoft Word for some reason as well. So people took that skill set, Visual Basic, an amazing language, and started to apply it within their business environment. Therefore, the first generation of data engineering is born, and nobody called that data engineering back then. But I remember that period, and I love that period, and Yes, we've made great progress since then, but the foundation stayed the same.
Nice. I always love this recurrent segment on the show, Eldad, where you explain to me, who kind of doesn't maybe know all of these things that people did back in the day
And
about concepts.
one last thing, ClickView, which turned ClickSense. I think it's a Swedish, originated in Sweden, one of the first BI companies that actually build a full stack. So you had the engine, in-memory engine, which was revolutionary from a slice and dice perspective. And you've had the UI in it, and you've had their own kind of VBA language, which was a bit different, but same concept. And it was a huge hit back then. The reason I know it so well, because in my previous startup, early on, we competed with ClickView. That ClickView was our nemesis, and everything we've did was compared to how the ClickView guys did. So thanks you for mentioning that. Great history.
Also, definitely a first on the data engineering show. I never heard ClickView mentioned before. So then, jumping a couple of years into the present, right? Tell us more about Xudo and basically what types of challenges you're facing today, and then helping companies solve.
Yeah, so I'm a sole consultant at Xudo. The idea first was to help people and companies to come up with a data strategy. And data strategy, in my definition, it is finding out how data can help you to improve your company by making more impact on revenue, by reducing costs and identifying redundancies, or the most important use case, in my view, for business intelligence is the peace of mind that you can trust the data that you're looking at to make decisions. So I thought I would build data strategy roadmaps and put building blocks on a roadmap and then execute a roadmap. But unfortunately, I didn't find any customers for this offering. So then I had to pivot, of course. So I pivoted the concept in hands-on working in the companies. So I usually have two types of companies I work for at the same time. One larger company that makes me money, and then a smaller company that I can really help build their data foundations from the ground up. In the larger companies, I take like a role in the data teams of the company themselves, and in the smaller companies, I work with the tools that the company has at hand, or I suggest my own tools that they can work with. And then, I prefer the smaller customers, but of course, the bigger customers pay the bills.
Right. This is actually super interesting and something we haven't explored that much on the show before. In many cases, we have like data engineers coming who work at companies that have like very established kind of data stacks, right? 10 different query engines, Iceberg, 5 BI tools, and so on. Like when you're maybe smaller and also like, I don't know, like company from a more traditional sector, kind of bootstrapping that data engineering or data warehousing stack. Tell us more about the types of challenges that are common there, and what maybe the most common struggles are.
Yeah, I think if people are looking to start their data journey, they usually wind up in their research on the websites of the technology vendors, and they are selling business intelligence projects as a software that will solve their problems. But in fact, business intelligence is always a change journey. So you have to approach it like this. If you do a bit BI well, then you will use the insights from the dashboards to improve your company, to improve the processes, and then also to maybe adapt the systems to those new processes. And then you go into a business intelligence cycle. So I think it's very important to make sure that the people who want to start using data are aware that it's if it's done well, it's always a transformational change for the organization, and that's something else than just implementing a software. And so I put a lot of emphasis on change management as well, and also starting from the top, leadership alignment on which are the KPIs of your business, which KPIs haven't you thought of yet, which are the obvious ones you want to tackle first, and then building kind of a roadmap starting there. But then also, of course, looking at the systems and the data that is in place. Where is the data? Can we access the data? And then building the top vision from the top, and starting from the data at the bottom and meeting in the middle with the nice dashboards to help the business move forward.
At what point are you usually engaging with companies then, right? Like say they reach out to you, kind of they're interested in your services. I guess at that point they already kind of bought into wanting to become data driven and wanting some data solutions. Or is it in many cases also that you're actually the one pitching the company, hey, you're not using any BI tools or anything right now? Tell us more about that very early part of that process.
Most of those type of clients come inbound, so they find me and they already have an idea that they want to start using data. And usually they already have some kind of tool or that they want to use as a source. And sometimes also they also have some kind of like one of these clients is called Onafhankelijk Leven. It's like a non-profit organization who helps people with disabilities. And they have a lot of data, and they had done a large CRM project with a custom-built application on top to help their coaches help these people. And then they knew they could do more with their data. And the tech stack they used to build the CRM and application was Zoho. So it's a very modular program. It's an Indian company. And Zoho also has an analytics module. So what they then did is they activated the analytics module. I studied it. I learned the new module, and I started building there. But of course, starting from the basics, building a data model, building an architecture, making sure that I could communicate what I was doing, but because the intention was to leave the company after a couple of months so that they could run it themselves and also extend it. So a little bit hard, of course, because if you've never worked with tools like this, it can be daunting. So I basically taught them the basics of SQL. And now they use ChatGPT to write extensions to the code. And then once a year, they call me in because they don't find the answer at ChatGPT. And then I solve their problems, for instance.
Nice. That's actually super interesting how Gen AI is already influencing workloads there, especially for maybe less technical users who aren't as exposed to that technology.
Yeah, it's, I think where I use Gen AI myself is to write simple standalone PowerShell scripts, for instance. Very powerful to do that. I haven't used it in larger deployments because it has to be integrated, it has to be persistent. I haven't used it myself that way, but for simple standalone scripts, it's very useful.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I've like done some benchmarking of Firebolt over the past couple of days, kind of just bootstrapped like some Python scripts, and it's like really like total magic at this point how easy it becomes, especially if it's like closely integrated with your IDE. During my day-to-day job, it's mostly like low-level C++ development. There, it's a bit less useful still in many cases, but especially for bootstrapping these standalone scripts, it's really crazy the amount of utility you can get from it.
It's also crazy how many tools, apps, and systems you can apply with Gen AI. You mentioned Zoho. Like, I wouldn't have never imagined that ChatGPT would be able to even remember that, and that's so widely used in very less technical environments. So now having Gen AI means we can start using a lot of what we already have. So use more of what we already have. That's especially important for people and companies that have challenges catching up and making sure they're properly aligned on the right stack. So it's not that needed anymore. You can just use Gen AI to cover the gaps, and it's fascinating to see, actually to hear it happen in real life.
Yeah, I think it's important in this case to understand that in Zoho you have different options to configure your setup. And I chose the option where you can write your own SQL so that you don't get locked into some type of a proprietary syntax of Zoho, where there are a lot less experts who know how to work with this.
One thing I'm super curious about is how do you think that actually changes these types of consulting projects, right? Because in the past, you basically at the end would have done a handover to their engineering team so they can solve their own problems. Now, in many cases, you're kind of handing over to the AI, right? Who kind of maintains things, does minor fixes themselves. Like, do you think that, for example, changes the way you would create like a knowledge base of the project before you give it into other hands? Like, give us your perspective on that. I'm super curious.
I think you still need a knowledge base to document things like architecture and high-level approach. I think the Gen AI in this case solves some minor type of issues they may have, or the questions they may want to try to answer using their data and extending the queries a little bit. But I think in this case, the power of Gen AI is to give the data environment in the hands of non-technical people who can think logically and who can describe the prompts they need to get the code they can then use. So I think you mentioned handing it over to the engineering team, but this nonprofit doesn't have an engineering team. So I'm their engineering team, and I'm not interested, to be fair, to take up these less interesting support tasks. So then they can work themselves. And then once a year, I can help them do a review or put them back on track a little bit.
Super, super interesting. So as you bootstrap then these data stacks, right? I think the company you talked about before already had like an existing solution where they had data in it. And then when you bootstrap the data warehousing stack, you need to adjust to that. In how many cases, like, is it like you have a blueprint for a data and BI stack that you can apply in many cases? Or is it really completely different, the actual solution you converge to from company to company?
Yeah. The companies that engage me usually already have a tech stack. So I don't really have the opportunity to recommend a stack at that time. And I learned the environment of the customers. So that's...
Would you fire a customer or a prospect for having the wrong stack or having a stack that you're absolutely not willing to work with?
Yeah, I think if I'm not comfortable to work with, I will honestly admit it, and probably the customer will not hire me. So that's kind of the way it works.
So there's still the tooling fit between the consultant and the client, and there needs to be a match. Not every tool will work with every consultant. And as you say, you will not start something with a stack that you don't trust, for example.
No, because I'm a philosopher in the end. I'm not that technical, and I don't want to. I don't want to pretend that I'm something I'm not. And
I think after like a decade plus in the industry, at some point you are also a philosopher, but also a data engineer, a BI engineer.
yeah, probably yes.
Super interesting. Cool. So when you then work with these larger clients, like how much of the problem basically translates? Like, do you feel like there's specific problems companies have that haven't done BI or data warehousing before, and then at a larger company it's completely different? Or does it actually translate across company sizes?
I think the first point that I mentioned, that BI projects have to be approached as change projects, also translates to larger customers, where the issue usually is not that they don't have enough technology, but they have too much. So they have to start pruning and merging overlapping dashboards together, or making sure that the message and the analysis that's possible in each dashboard is very clear for the end users. And then you go more down the governance track. I think behind this thing I see at larger companies is still the same issue, so that they are still approaching BI projects as a software project and not as a change project.
One thing I'm curious about here that you mentioned in the beginning is that data lineage and data quality is also something that really matters in these transformation processes, because obviously you want to make sure that the dashboard you look at to then make business decisions and change your strategy maybe has the right data. One thing that I find curious about it is that if you think about tools for this, like Monte Carlo, which does like data quality and kind of these types of things, to me, it always felt like something that actually happens quite far down your data journey, right? So you have your data stack kind of, and then at some point you have your first incidents, right? And you realize, oh, damn, this dashboard I looked at actually represents something that doesn't reflect reality at all. It's interesting to me that this is something you already then push for that early on in the process. Like, it makes intuitively a lot of sense, but I would actually expect that for many companies, this is something that comes much later and not by the time they bootstrap their BI or data warehousing stack.
You mean to approach it as a change project, or you mean governance? Or?
I mean, like these kind of governance, lineage aspects, kind of data quality aspects, and so on. Like I always felt like that might be more of a reaction to then issues you run into once you establish that the first time. And that for many companies, this is actually not something that they think about on day one.
Yeah, I think if you talk about data lineage, you can do it in two ways. Or you start building your data model with where you draw your lines between your source, your intermediate layers, and then your visualization layers. And then you have some kind of plan up front, and that's the data lineage that you then have to maintain when you start building and when you start expanding this environment. And in an ideal world, everyone documents everything, and then you can find exactly what data is where and how it is used. Of course, in practice, it's usually not that clear. The people start building and then they have something that works and the business relies on it until there's a question, where is this data coming from? And nobody knows. And then you have to start documenting, like kind of re-engineering where the data is coming from, what different steps are between the source and visualization, and can be extremely complex. So that's two ways I look at data lineage, one upfront and one after the fact. And I think the second one is data lineage that I've done a couple of times for larger clients who have a lot of data, a lot of complex transformations, just to communicate the complexity and to also make them understand how difficult it is to change something and to build upon the existing data. And then, of course, you have tools to automate this kind of lineage, but in my experience, it's never really able to capture all the complexity that's going on. For instance, if you have a select star somewhere, it doesn't know, I don't know any tool who can then go back in the code and find the exact fields that are used in the star, for instance.
It also depends on the source, right? Like usually people think logs, data points that engineers generate while building apps. But most of the world is still depends on a CRM, ERP, complex models, very business-driven vertical data sources, federated sources. So a lot of stuff that many times we tend to forget when we go with the kind of cloud native logs data. So I think modern lineage and quality is focusing on the latter, like on logs generated data, where as we build the apps and generate the logs, we make mistakes as engineers, and that needs to be fixed and that needs to be kind of cataloged. But if you just go a few years back and look at existing data models, this is a whole different game. And that requires the human factor. And I connect to that a lot because people and companies spend fortunes of time and effort in building those things. The business runs on those things. And it's not easy to just go in and say, let's just replace it. So it's kind of like a surgery, one little step at a time, trying to figure out how to do most impact with as less harm as possible. And again, it's also kind of an educational and technological aspect, right? If you're born into data, into tech from day zero, and you've went through the usual cycles and education, it's one thing, but it's a very different thing if you already have a huge business and you've operated for many years on previous generations of IT systems. So there's a lot of work ahead, and most companies need consultants. Not just to consult, but to really guide them from one era to another era. And there's a lot of philosophy in it. So a lot of human factor, a lot of convincing and reasoning, and it has nothing to do with technology.
I agree. Well, sometimes I try to make the connection between philosophy and data, and then the case that you described, Eldad, is, for instance, a way of looking from philosophy through a lens of philosophy to this kind of data project. Is like you have to talk the same language. So in order to understand each other, often that's already an issue within large companies. You have different teams with different cultures. Sometimes the people who built the legacy systems are still there. They're completely talking a different language than the younger hires who are cloud native, and then already to recognize that this can be a problem, that there is a different culture and a different way of using words that can help to unlock some difficulties that those companies have.
So talking about cloud native hires, in how many cases are the companies you're working with actually on the cloud already? Like, is most of the work you're doing on-prem, or are these companies usually in the cloud already? And if they're not, is this like maybe also part of the journey?
Yeah, like the nonprofit I was talking about, they started in the cloud. Like So is kind of a cloud platform, so it started in the cloud. The larger companies usually started on-prem and then migrated some of their tools already to the cloud, or maybe they are in the process of doing so. Yeah, that are the two cases I see at this time.
Interesting. Cool. Awesome, Wouter. And anything else that at the moment you see popping up a lot in the industry that like you're passionate about, that you wanted to chat about today on the podcast?
I think that what I'm most excited about are the people who are on social media talking about going back to basics. So I think a couple of years ago, everything wanted to do new things, but I think we have to understand that the old things were there for a reason. And I think people are rediscovering some of the basic concepts now, and I'm glad to see that. Yeah.
Nice. That's, by the way, a like very recurring theme, and I think kind of sentiment that a lot of people in the industry have.
Data is like fashion; it goes in cycles. We always get to the same starting point, in a good way, of course.
Yeah.
Very cool. Then, Wouter, thank you so much for being on the show today. Seriously, like this was like totally amazing perspective. Like we really kind of never had a guest who works that much kind of with companies in the early stages of their data journey. So it was amazing to have you on. All of the best with the clients you're working with. And thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The Data Engineering Show is brought to you by Firebolt, the cloud data warehouse for low latency analytics. Get $200 credits and start your free trial at firebolt.io.